Apple doesn't make the best smartphone. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Every year, reviewers compare flagship phones, and almost every year, another company beats Apple in something. Samsung gives you better zoom. Google offers smarter AI features. Chinese manufacturers pack in faster charging, brighter displays, bigger batteries, and more megapixels. If technology were simply about having the best specifications, Apple should have lost this race years ago. But it didn't. In fact, while its competitors fight to build the most advanced phone every single year, Apple quietly walks away with the vast majority of the smartphone industry's profits. That's the real mystery. How can a company that intentionally leaves out features continue to dominate one of the most competitive industries on Earth? The answer is that Apple was never trying to build the best phone. It was building something far more valuable. To understand why, we need to go back to 2007. At the time, the smartphone market looked completely different. Nokia ruled the world. BlackBerry owned the business market. Motorola was still relevant, and companies competed on one thing above everything else: hardware. Every year meant more buttons, bigger batteries, removable backs, expandable storage, and longer specification sheets. Consumers believed the phone with the most features was automatically the better phone. Then Steve Jobs walked onto a stage holding a device that broke almost every rule. The first iPhone didn't have a physical keyboard. It couldn't record video. It didn't support copy and paste. It didn't even have an app store. By the standards of 2007, it was actually missing many features that cheaper phones already had. Technology experts criticized it immediately. Some believed Apple had made a huge mistake. Yet Steve Jobs wasn't trying to win a specification war. He was trying to solve a different problem entirely. He believed technology shouldn't feel complicated. Instead of overwhelming users with endless features, Apple focused on making every interaction feel effortless. While competitors kept asking, "What else can we add?" Apple asked a completely different question: "What can we remove?" That single philosophy would eventually reshape the entire technology industry. But Apple's obsession with simplicity came at a price. Every decision it made looked irrational to competitors. No expandable storage. No removable battery. No headphone jack. No stylus. Year after year, Apple removed features that people claimed they wanted. And somehow, customers kept coming back. Why? Because Apple wasn't selling a phone anymore. It was quietly building something much bigger. Apple understood something that almost every technology company ignored. People don't actually buy smartphones because of processors, megapixels, or benchmark scores. They buy them because of how those devices make them feel. Every Android manufacturer focused on winning the comparison chart. Apple focused on winning the experience. That difference changed everything. While competitors rushed to release dozens of different models every year, Apple released only a handful. Instead of giving customers hundreds of choices, it carefully limited them. At first glance, that seems like a terrible business strategy. More products should mean more sales. But Apple realized that too many choices create confusion, and confused customers often don't buy anything. Simplicity became one of Apple's greatest competitive advantages. But the real genius wasn't the iPhone itself. It was what happened after you bought one. Imagine purchasing your first iPhone. Then you buy AirPods because they connect instantly. Later, you purchase an Apple Watch because it automatically syncs with your phone. Eventually, you buy a MacBook because your photos, messages, passwords, and files already exist inside Apple's ecosystem. Before long, switching to another brand no longer feels like changing phones. It feels like moving your entire digital life. That's exactly what Apple wanted. The company wasn't creating individual products. It was building an ecosystem where every device made the others more valuable. Each new purchase increased the cost of leaving. Not because customers were trapped, but because everything worked so effortlessly together. This strategy became Apple's invisible moat. Competitors could copy the hardware. They could match the camera. They could even build faster processors. But recreating an ecosystem refined over years of hardware, software, services, and customer trust was an entirely different challenge. Then Apple made another decision that shocked the industry. It refused to compete on price. While smartphone brands raced to release cheaper models, Apple continued raising prices. Conventional business wisdom says lower prices attract more customers. Apple proved that wasn't always true. Higher prices transformed the iPhone from a piece of technology into a luxury product. Much like Rolex doesn't compete with Casio, Apple wasn't trying to be the cheapest smartphone. It wanted to become the most desirable one. Owning an iPhone became more than owning a device. It became a symbol of quality, reliability, and status. The company's marketing reinforced that image at every opportunity. Minimalist advertisements, elegant retail stores, premium packaging, carefully choreographed product launches. Everything was designed to make customers feel they weren't simply buying electronics. They were joining an exclusive experience. And perhaps the smartest part of Apple's strategy was knowing exactly when not to innovate. While competitors introduced flashy features every year, Apple often waited. Foldable phones, high refresh rate displays, AI tools, larger camera sensors. In many cases, Apple arrived years later. Critics called the company slow, but Apple rarely wanted to be first. It wanted to be the company that made new technology simple enough for millions of ordinary people to trust. Being first creates headlines. Being reliable creates billion-dollar businesses. And that patient approach would eventually turn Apple into the most profitable consumer technology company in history. But Apple's biggest advantage wasn't its hardware, its software, or even its ecosystem. It was something far more powerful and almost completely invisible. That invisible advantage was trust. It's one of the hardest things to build and one of the easiest things to lose. Over nearly 2 decades, Apple trained millions of customers to believe that when they bought an Apple product, it would simply work. No complicated setup, no confusing software, no endless compatibility issues. Just a smooth, predictable experience. That trust became more valuable than any single feature ever could. Think about how most people actually buy smartphones. They don't spend hours comparing processor architectures or reading benchmark scores. They ask their friends what they use. They walk into a store. They pick up a phone that feels premium in their hand. And if their last iPhone lasted 5 or 6 years without major problems, buying another one becomes the easiest decision they can make. Apple understood that purchasing decisions are driven more by emotion than logic. Specifications appeal to enthusiasts. Experiences appeal to everyone else. That's why Apple spends so much time refining the smallest details. The sound of the camera shutter, the smoothness of animations, the feel of the aluminum frame, the satisfying click of a button, even the way the product box slowly opens because of carefully controlled air pressure. None of these details appear on a specification sheet, yet together they create the feeling of quality. And feelings are remarkably difficult for competitors to copy. Apple also mastered something that many businesses overlook: consistency. Every Apple store looks familiar no matter where you are in the world. Every keynote follows the same polished style. Every product uses a recognizable design language. Every piece of packaging feels intentional. This consistency strengthens the brand with every interaction. Customers know exactly what to expect, and that predictability builds confidence. But perhaps Apple's greatest business decision had nothing to do with hardware at all. It was services. As the iPhone installed base grew into hundreds of millions of users, Apple gradually expanded beyond selling devices. iCloud stored photos and files. Apple Music replaced CDs and downloads. Apple TV Plus, Apple Arcade, Apple Pay, Apple Care, and the App Store created recurring revenue streams that continued generating income long after the initial phone sale. Suddenly, the iPhone wasn't the end product. It became the gateway to an entire ecosystem of services. Every new customer represented years of future revenue instead of a single purchase. Investors loved this transformation because recurring income is far more predictable than one-time hardware sales. It also made Apple's business more resilient. Even during years when iPhone sales slowed, millions of customers continued paying for subscriptions and services every month. Meanwhile, competitors remained trapped in an endless cycle of releasing increasingly powerful hardware just to maintain market share. They fought specification wars with shrinking profit margins. Apple played an entirely different game. It optimized for lifetime customer value instead of annual hardware victories. That's why Apple can release a phone with fewer headline features and still generate more profit than companies shipping far more devices. The company isn't trying to win the technology race. It's trying to win the customer relationship. And once you understand that, many of Apple's seemingly strange decisions suddenly make perfect sense. Removing the headphone jack, designing custom chips, building its own operating system, creating exclusive accessories. even delaying certain features until they meet Apple standards. None of these decisions were random. They all served one larger objective: making the Apple ecosystem more valuable than any individual product inside it. But this strategy reveals an even bigger lesson, one that extends far beyond smartphones and explains why some of the world's greatest companies rarely compete on having the best product at all. The biggest companies in the world don't win because they build the best product. They win because they build the best business. And those are two very different things. It's easy to copy a feature. It's much harder to copy a relationship. Every year, smartphone manufacturers release devices with faster processors, brighter displays, larger batteries, and cameras that outperform the iPhone in laboratory tests. Yet millions of people continue choosing Apple anyway. Not because they don't care about innovation, but because Apple has spent nearly 2 decades building something competitors can't measure on a specification sheet: trust, simplicity, consistency, and an ecosystem that quietly becomes more valuable with every new device you own. That's why Apple rarely rushes to be first. It doesn't need to. By the time Apple introduces a new technology, the company has usually spent years refining it until it feels reliable enough for hundreds of millions of everyday users. While others compete for headlines, Apple competes for habits. And habits are incredibly difficult to break. Once your photos, messages, passwords, documents, payments, smartwatch, laptop, earbuds, and cloud storage all work together seamlessly, leaving isn't just about buying another phone. It's about rebuilding your entire digital life. That's not an accident. It's one of the greatest business strategies ever created. And it's why Apple can sell millions of phones every year without winning every specification battle. In fact, chasing the best phone might have been the worst decision Apple could have made. Building the fastest processor or the highest megapixel camera creates a temporary advantage. Building an experience that customers don't want to leave creates a lasting one. That's the difference between a product company and a platform company. Apple stopped selling phones a long time ago. Today, it sells an experience, one that begins with an iPhone but expands into an entire digital lifestyle. And that explains the question we started with. Apple never wanted to build the best phone because the phone was never the real product. The ecosystem was. The relationship was. The brand was. The phone was simply the door that invited you inside. And as long as millions of customers continue walking through that door, Apple doesn't have to win every technological battle. It only has to keep winning the one that matters most: the customer's trust. That's why, despite every new competitor, every breakthrough feature, and every prediction that Apple's dominance is coming to an end, the company continues to do something almost unbelievable. It doesn't build the best phone. It builds the phone that people want to keep buying. And in business, that's often far